Shalom, shalom, Mishpacha, Wahabadim. What's up? It's your girl 916 Shan, Ashanti or Shanti Dot. Excuse me, my allergies are really killing me right now, but bear with me. Coming back doing another video for I Suffer Not a Woman book review. We're closing out the book review with this video, and I will be doing another video hopefully in the next couple of weeks. I know it's been a while since I last came on. A lot been going on. I've been dibbling and dabbling in some more other studies, both letters when it comes to women, and provide some historical evidence of information to actually bring out or enlighten those letters, especially the passages about women are actually saying. So I'm going to be bringing some information out with my brother BA. It's going to be off the chain. It's going to be off the hook. It's going to be empowering. It's going to be liberating. It's going to be a joyous thing, and it's going to make sure that people know how to go back and study for themselves, validate and verify for themselves, ask the Holy Spirit to lead and guide into all truth. You know, that's what it's going to be. It's going to make sure that we understand the Father's word the way He wants us to understand His word. Misinformation has been put out, a lot of mistranslation, which leads to misinterpretation, has got us into a lot of chaos, disorder, disruption, and dysfunction. And where there's chaos, dysfunction, and disruption, the spirit of the Most High Yahweh is not dwelling. So I want to make sure that I do my part to be used as a vessel by Yahweh and for Yahweh and for His people, so that we can get the proper tools out there, get the proper information out there so that people can go back and get it for themselves. Because this is a personal walk, it's a personal relationship, this is a personal faith that people strive to live out every day of their lives. And we got to make sure we understand the instruction manual. And got to make sure we understand that there's tools out there to help us understand the instruction manual. Or tools out there to help us navigate our way through living this walk of faith. So, I Suffer Not a Woman is a book by Catherine Kroger and her husband. She's well fluent in the Greek language. The New Testament was originally written in Greek, and we do have some evidence provided by Eusebius that the book of Matthew, the Essenes do have the book of Matthew in its original Hebrew. The shan-t Hebrew Matthew, but as far as the other Gospels, Mark, Luke, and John, as far as the book of Acts, and a lot of the epistles or letters that Shaul wrote to the congregations, that information we do have that the New Testament was written in Greek. There's papyri out there available online actually that you can go see for yourself. So, I started this some months ago about 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12. The famous passage that says, I suffer not a woman to teach. And we've been looking at that. We brought out the evidence that the translation is a little bit off. The meaning of the original Greek word for that passage has to be understood in its proper context, starting from 1 Timothy chapter 1. We see there was a false gospel being spread, and we see that false gospel being spread was Gnosticism, and we see that Gnosticism actually enlightened some women, or the feminine principle, as the creators of them, as creators of themselves, as creators of the world. And we know that's not true. Those who believe in the Most High Yahweh, we believe Yahweh, the Lord God of Elohim. The Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the supreme creator. You go back and watch parts 1 through 9, and we looked at a whole bunch of chapters. The last video we were looking at, were the women being refuted? So we see that there was Gnosticism going on or the creation story was pretty much turned upside down. So Paul was telling Timothy to make sure you get this false doctrine under control. And a lot of the people spreading the false doctrine were women as well as men, but you got to go back and watch parts 1 through 9. There's a certain teaching that should not be taught by men or women. So let me continue here. We're going to be looking at chapters, 12, 13, and 14 of the book. I'm not going to be reading the whole thing. I'm going to be reading some of it, but not all of it, pretty much giving a summary. So hope you enjoy. I got the live chat open. If you got any questions, comments, or concerns, the live chat is open. If you're looking from your phone, you click on the bottom where it says live chat, and then it should open up, and then you can actually see what you can type in there. All right. All right, so let's see. Let's turn this up just a little bit. Okay. Share the screen. All right, going to be starting off with chapter 12, new stories for old. New stories for old. This right here is, we're going to be talking about, you know, how these stories came about, how Gnosticism came about, how these myths and legends came about, and how these characters from these stories, you know, became spiritualized and adorned and deified, and how Eve was looked at when it came to Gnosticism. That's what we're going to be looking at today. So, new stories for old. Epiphanius wrote that every Greek sect revised to its own purposes, and the story of Eve was by no means the only tale to undergo a radical transformation in the period preceding and following the New Testament era. Right? So in this chapter, we shall examine reinterpretations of some of the pagan myths and note the tendencies which are also apparent in the Eve mythology. I'm not going to read all of these, but you know, these tales, these Greek tales, like they said, were revised to suit their own purposes, to suit people's own agendas, right? So they had to get a story, retell it to fit what they wanted it to do, you know. All right, so there was some spiritualizing the traditional heroines, right? I'm not going to read all of this, but I'm just going to give you a gist of what was going on. All right, let's see here. Minucius Felix reported that the fables of old women had molded religious opinion all too easily in the pagan past. As these stories were told, they began to change shape. Much like the telephone game, when you tell stories, when you pass something down orally, things can change because people don't remember things all the time. They don't always get the story straight, right? They start adding words, taking away words, and you missing the narrative sometime, right? So by the 1st century CE or AD, the process of spiritualization of myths was widespread, right? Plutarch, for example, was said to convert myths reverently into mystic theologies. Myths were being made to bear a message often quite at variance from the original purpose for which they were formed, right? All right, so by the 1st century of the Common Era, the story of Eve was certainly included in the widespread transformation of story material. So her original story was getting revised for somebody to have it fit their own ideas, their own purposes. Right? And one of the most important conservators of myth is the poet playwright Euripides, whose works show a remarkable sympathy for women. All right. In the post-classical age, Euripides' stories came to be used as salvation motifs. Wow. So telling these stories to get some type of salvation, right? A case in point is the great playwright's treatment of Alcestis, the heroic wife, who gave her own life to spare that of her husband. She was rescued from the underworld by Hercules and restored to her grieving family. In subsequent religious thought, Alcestis and I guess that's how you pronounce it. Alcestis became a figure of salvation and immortality. That's crazy. The one remaining columnar drum from the famed Temple of Artemis of Ephesus shows Euripides' heroine Alcestis being handed over by Hermes, the conductor of souls, to death. She was frequently depicted on funerary bases, sarcophagi, and tomb walls as a symbol of consolation and an emblem of victory over death. Crazy. All right. I'm not going to read all of this. Here. I'm trying to get the pertinent parts of Eve. Okay, here we go. All right, Eve. Eve. Starting from the second paragraph over, says Eve, as represented in Gnostic texts, and we talked about what those Gnostic texts were, right? Is raped by a celestial being in disguise, bears two children who are important progenitors, suffers outrageous abuse, is persecuted, and finally conveys the knowledge of good and evil to the human race. Wow. Hey, these Gnostic texts, they told these crazy stories, you know what I mean? Upside down creation stories, you know, and we see the creation stories from Genesis 1, 2, and 3. But let me continue. The story told in Gnostic text bears a great similarity to other tales in which spiritually endowed, often hieratic heroines are raped and impregnated by superhuman beings, usually gods in disguise, and bear two children, usually sons. Often they were forcibly separated from their children at birth. Right? In the end, all of these heroines are vindicated, and those who have suffered the most have gained a mystic knowledge which they can impart to others. Okay, so, and then it goes into the story about the Lenipe, right? And I'm not going to read all of that, but you start seeing you start seeing where all these stories and myths, they come about, and these stories and myths are told orally, you know, to children, and the children grow up and they have children, and the adults teach it to their children. So we see how these stories keep getting spread and perpetuated all across, and these mythological figures, like they said, they get spiritualized and they start becoming stories about salvation, heroines that have this kind of saving manner. This is crazy. So we've seen like what's going on. We've seen that this was happening in 1st century AD, right? All right, so let me continue. Let me share the screen here. All right, I'm not going to read all of the story of Melanippe. This is another story of Antiope, the worst treated of Zeus's rape victims. You know what I mean? Like I was saying, or excuse me, like I was reading, the usually raped and become these victors or whatever, and because they endure all this stuff and separated from their children. So they're like, okay, this is some crazy stuff. I'm not going to read all this story. But we're seeing that, you know, storytellers coming about, passing down these stories. All right. Let's see. Trying to get back to the Eve, the Eve here, Eve, not the one who raps tambourine. All right. In Asia Minor, an amulet was recovered that bears another scene of initiation. So they had these cults of the therapy. They what do you call it? The Eleusinian mysteries. Mysteries and another type of cult that people were into, that had women priestesses, you know, the oracles of Delphi, If you go back and study that information, you'll see what's being talked about when it talks about initiation into those cults and things like that. So in Asia Minor, an amulet was recovered that bears an unseen of initiation in some ways similar to that of Antiope, instructing Dionysus in his own mysteries. So, you know, the priestess in the oracles of Delphi, she was acting as the mediator and stuff like that. So that's why in 1 Timothy, Paul was telling the Ephesians there, or Paul was telling Timothy to let the Ephesians know that there is only one mediator, and that one mediator is Yeshua the Messiah. The mediator is not the woman, but in these mystery cult systems here, you have the priestess, the oracles of Delphi, given the oracles of Delphi, with the woman mediating. You know, she was the go-between. She was the in-between. She was the in-between of the gods and the people who were coming to the gods, right? So the amulet shows Eve dispensing the knowledge or the gnosis of good and evil to Adam. Good enough amulet as Gnostic in view of the total lack of shame displayed, a marked contrast to Christian art. The serpent twines around the tree and reaches out toward Eve with a kiss, perhaps indicative of their sexual union. Now, I know you guys have heard all this serpent seed things out there, because people say, oh, well, Eve had sex with a snake. I've heard that stuff too, and you guys are starting to see where all that stuff came from. You know what I mean? This is, you know, you guys got to be aware of where these Greeks and Romans get their little stories from, because a lot of it came from the Persian and Babylonian Empire. You know what I mean? So let me continue. Beside the tree are the Hebrew letters Chet and Dalet, which Berger Pearson suggests stand for life and knowledge. The two trees of Genesis chapter 2, verse 9, understood Gnostically as a single tree portrayed on the amulet. All right. So indeed, life and knowledge are the two blessings which Gnostic myth maintains Eve bestowed on Adam. In both the amulet and the tomb painting, female offers knowledge to male initiate. And in both scenes, they are accompanied by the male sexual partner who made the revelation possible. So you see that illustration 11 there. You see the amulet depicting Eve giving knowledge of good and evil to Adam. That's Gnosticism, you guys. Woo! This is crazy. And we're gonna, like we said, we see how Eve was revised. The story of Eve was revived to suit people's little pagan beliefs. Here we go. Cupid and Psyche. Another myth also serves as a prototype for the development of Eve's story in the Gnostic text. It is the tale of Cupid and Psyche. This myth appears to have circulated widely in the ancient world and is preserved by Apuleius, right? It is presented as a story told by an old woman to comfort a young bride who has been kidnapped by bandits. So, you know, in Timothy, you know, Paul was admonishing Timothy again, you know, with some of these people telling these old wives' tales, Jewish fables, right? Coming from this false doctrine of Gnosticism sect. And we're going to see how it played a part in the Judaism of old, right? So I got to read this because this is a crazy story. In the story, Venus becomes jealous of a beautiful young woman whose name Psyche means soul. She sends her son Cupid to wreak vengeance upon the hapless girl, but Cupid instead falls in love with her and manages to waft her away. He comes to her only at night and forbids her to see him. Her sisters are allowed to visit and, jealous of her beautiful surroundings, persuade Psyche to spy upon her mysterious lover. Wow. So we see where February 14th and all this Cupid stuff is coming from, right? This is crazy. She lights a lamp and gazes upon the sleeping Cupid, but he awakes when she spills a drop of hot lamp oil upon her. Of course she would wake. You got hot lamp oil on you? Come on now. Enraged, he leaves her, and in grief she wanders over the earth seeking him. In despair, Psyche turns to Venus, wow, who commands her to perform formidable task. Like the other heroines, she endures trials, ordeals, and dangers. You know, heroine. If you can go through all this danger and still be an overcomer, people look at you and they deify you, right? That's crazy. So finally, Venus sends her to Hades itself, where Persephone, goddess of the underworld, gives her a sealed jar supposedly containing beauty. A jar with beauty in it. Although she has been cautioned not to open it, Psyche breaks open the seal and is nearly overcome by a fatal sleep. But now Cupid, who at last regrets his hasty behavior, relents and begs Jupiter, who's Zeus, in their marriage. The king of the gods ascends, and Psyche is brought to heaven as the bride of love. The plot clearly is developed along the lines of a mystery initiation. Oh, wow. Listen to this. Of all the myths of ancient heroines, this story most clearly describes the searching of the soul for salvation and union with the divine. Many of the vicissitudes of Sophia Eve in Gnostic stories parallel those of Psyche. And scholars have noted the evidence of borrowing from the Cupid and Psyche story in certain Gnostic renderings of the Eve story. Eve, too, is often allegorized as the soul, and her story frequently includes a grievous fault committed, grief, wanderings, dangers, and trials. Her story had many antecedents. All right. So this is this is wild. We still got some more to go about, you know, how Eve was characterized in these stories, right? And the way she was characterized in these stories, of course, you're going to think that each woman out here is a reproduction of Eve. If you're made to look at Eve in this manner, we're going to see some things. Let me go back to sharing the screen. Woo! 1 Timothy chapter 2, y'all, is coming to light. Actually, if you go back and start to read 1 Timothy, starting from chapter 1, you see all this false doctrine going on. But like I said, when me and my brother BA out, I got some more things to bring out about Timothy, especially with these widows and all this stuff, these, you know, Hellenist and Hellenistic views and ways, culture, the people were caring about, and some of the Hellenistic ways actually, the Israelites were assimilated into a lot of Hellenism. All right, so let me get back to the thing here. It's 4:23. All right, I'm not trying to be all day, but this is off the chain. Here we go. Changing perspectives on Eve. Woo! In each of these stories, a woman endured prolonged punishment for a misdeed, usually being unable to repel the seductive advances of the superhuman being. Even the feminine perpetrators of heinous crimes could be reinterpreted in a more kindly light. Let me keep going here. All right, let's start here. No figure has been more consistently blamed and loaded with guilt than Eve. Now you see, or now you hear, where all the bad treatment of women is coming from. You want to paint Eve in a bad light, so every woman gets painted in a bad light because she's just a woman. But not understanding these myths, they get past. They're fables. They're not true. All right? By the turn of the era, two widely divergent perspectives developed relating to Eve. The first viewed her as responsible for many of the tribulations and discomforts of being born a woman. Menstruation, labor pains, and subjugation were considered consequences of her primary role in the fall. If you go back and look at the video I did, Commander Curse, Brother BA and I bring out some things talking about that. She is not cursed herself. The function of the female and the function of the female as their connecto is cursed, but we're not supposed to be living in the curse. We're trying to be living in the blessing. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Let me continue. This was not true, excuse me, this was true not only in Christian tradition, but also in Jewish thought. In early Judaism, women were required to walk before the corpse at a funeral because Eve had brought death into the world. They must light the Sabbath lamps because Eve had brought darkness. Now, I know, let me pause right here. It says, women must light the Sabbath lamps because Eve had brought darkness. Some of these Israelites out here talking about we finna light these Sabbath candles, and you see the woman lighting the Sabbath candles, and she thinks she's doing a good thing. Does the information I just read say that the woman having to light the candles at Sabbath is a good thing? I got to get a little passionate. Right now. Go back. Let me go back. In further recompense, they must prepare the dough offering because Adam, the pure dough of the world, had been corrupted by his spouse, making a challah bread, right? Challah bread. You got to prepare the dough for the challah bread. Now, I'm not saying challah bread is wrong to eat. I'm not saying it's wrong to prepare. You know what I'm saying? I ain't made challah bread yet. I actually got some sisters who make it, and I was like, man, I want to try that out because challah bread is delicious. It's delicious. Wow. But when you having to do something, prepare some food because of a punishment, that's not cool. You're supposed to be cooking for a nourishment of life. Good grief. All right, here we go. These requirements served as constant reminders that women still bore the stigma of Eve's sin. And people wonder why I'm going hard today to make sure this word gets brought out, to liberate. This is not nothing to do with no feminism. People want to call me a feminist out here. Why? Why? Because I'm bringing the truth to light about the Father's word. Because people can no longer be in bondage of your false doctrines. Don't like that, no. Yeshua said, if the world hates you, know that it hated me first. I must be a child of Yeshua then. Let me continue. At Eve's door, the blame for the advent of sin and death into the world is Ben Sirach in the 2nd century BCE. So that's before Common Era. That's Ecclesiasticus chapter 25. Ben Sirach is in the Apocrypha, right? By the time of the New Testament, the pseudepigraphic versions of the Eve story bitterly denounce her for having been deceived by a celestial seducer. She must everlastingly bear the burden of guilt. In the 1st century work, known as Life of Adam and Eve, she cries, alas, alas, when I come to the day of resurrection, all who have sinned will curse me, saying that Eve did not keep the command of God. To the storytellers, Eve may have presented a challenge. She too might be vindicated, as had others invested with mystic knowledge. If she had borne a universal opprobrium, she might also be the moderator who had brought life and enlightenment to the human race. So in Gnostic circles, another perspective developed on Eve. She came to symbolize blessing rather than blame, life rather than death, and light rather than darkness. Women intent on rehabilitation or perhaps rebellion could well champion her cause. This was one way to deal with the guilt of Eve. So we maintain that the Apostle Paul offered a different view of Eve's status when he declared, nevertheless, she shall be saved. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. Rather than consigning Eve to everlasting condemnation, he was pointing to the promise of Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, that the serpent should bruise the woman's child, but that the child would bruise the serpent's head. Through the defeat of Satan on the cross of Jesus Christ, or on the stake of Yeshua the Messiah, her sin and guilt were wiped away. He redeemed through her blessed offspring who brought salvation and forgiveness into the world. In a later chapter, we shall suggest that the message of 1 Timothy chapter 2:15 brings good news to womankind at another level. So in that later chapter, that's what we're going to look at, because over in that verse in 1 Timothy chapter 2, it says the woman shall be saved through childbearing. No, you are saved by grace through faith. So a lot of this gnostic teaching was saying that this woman had to bear a child in order to gain salvation. So that's how you know, again, this whole Gnosticism thing is off the chain. It's out of order. All right. Let me continue. I think we're moving on to chapter 13 now. Moving right along. Moving right along. I can't sing. I know I can't sing. But I can hold a note. Shalom says, how are you? Shalom, shalom. If you got any questions, concerns, comments, or you need me to repeat anything, let me know. All right. So, chapter 13. this chapter kind of blew my mind too. All these chapters blew my mind. This book is something to have. You know what I mean? And I love to bring this information out because a lot of our brothers and sisters, man, a lot of them don't bring this information out. I mean, we need some better understanding. Paul is hard to understand when you don't have the tools. Okay, here we go. Of Jewish and Gnostic heroines. So we're going to see where a lot of Israelite and women in Judaism, right? They've incorporated a lot of this Greek thought, Roman thought, Hellenistic thought into their culture and their mindset, right? So are you saying that women are not saved through childbearing? What does the verse mean? Well, Paul says we are saved by grace through faith. You know what I mean? It says we are saved by grace through faith. When somebody says you got to have a baby or you got to have a birth to be saved, that's not true. And that was a doctrine that was being spread. So when I okay, it said when Rachel finally got pregnant, she said her reproach was taken away. Well, yeah, because back in that time, sis, women were shunned for not being able to give their companion, their male companion, a child, especially a boy child. The boy child carries the family lineage, carries the family name. So you're saved by grace through faith. You're not necessarily saved to have a baby. You're not saved by having a baby. But so 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15, it is alluding back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, where the promise of the Messiah is coming. You know, to get rid of the curse of the law of sin and death, Yeshua comes. So through the line of Eve, Yeshua is born. Yeshua is the Messiah. All right. All right. Any more questions, sis? Okay. Let me continue. That's good questions. Good questions. I think in the latter chapter, this chapter. Yeah. Yep. That's true. That's true, sis. It's very true. There's some information further I'm going to be bringing out when I bring out some other stuff about why women get treated the way we do over here in the Israelite community and over here in the Christian community, whatever. But a lot of our Israelite men don't know that they're treating us like Greco-Roman women. Okay, they're treating us like Greco-Roman women. There are some things about contraceptives in the information I'm going to bring out. So yeah, cool. Okay, okay, cool. All right. So let's continue. share the screen. All right. If the embellishment of myth can most clearly be traced in the beginning of the story of Euripides, the process did not end there. Storytellers performed the same sort of operation with other materials. And these myths could derive also from other sources which were deemed authoritative. One such authoritative source was the Hebrew Bible, and many reinterpretations of the basic stories emerged. An apparent favorite with old women was the Garden of Eden story. Process involved men as well as women. So we see what's going on. All right. So we look at a lot of the writings in the Apocrypha I talk about here. And they call them pseudepigrapha, the Gnostic text, the Nag Hammadi. So I'm not going to read all of that there. All right, here we go. The Jewish community, both inside and outside of Ephesus, was not reluctant to vest women with unusual spiritual powers. So one of our sources for Hellenistic Jewish thought, there it goes, lies in the extensive writings of Philo of Alexandria, a contemporary of both Jesus and Paul. So Philo, though a Jew, was profoundly influenced by Greek religious ideas and frequently tried to reinterpret Judaism in light. He was especially fond of allegorizing Bible stories to convey Grecianized concepts. I have the book of Philo. He's got some good things in there, but you can see you got to be careful with him in some areas because yes, his influence of Greek religious ideas are very much seen in his book. So. One moment. All right, since sexual union was used in the pagan mysteries to heighten or portray religious experience, Philo draws on the same vein. Instruction in the mysteries was communicated by a feminine figure, or an abstraction such as Sophia, wisdom. God then was the husband of wisdom. Philo carried the feminine spiritual principle one step further, however, and applied the image of enlightener to various Bible heroines. He allegorized the marriages of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as being the beginning of their spiritual maturity. Their wives symbolized heavenly wisdom, and the consummation brought divine enlightenment. Sarah, for instance, represents virtue made perfect through teaching. Rebecca's name is allegorized as wisdom, the daughter of God, who is the firstborn mother of all things. Her function as drawing water and carrier, her functions as drawing and carrier of water symbolizes carrying eternal wisdom of knowledge from the divine spring. And Philo conceived of Rebecca as instructor, for the word was hers who was teaching, and the ears were his who received the teaching. She is a teacher of a man, and her mother's house is called the maternal household of wisdom. Rachel, too, brought enlightenment to her husband when he obeyed his father's Isaac's command to take a wife who loved the wisdom of knowledge. Where else except from the house of wisdom shall he find a partner, blameless in judgment, with whom to remain always? Zipporah, the bride of Moses, symbolized soaring virtue, which contemplated the divine, and Eve illuminated Adam. This is wild. This is what happens when you try to implement Greek gnostic thought into the Hebraic text. You get jacked up. All right. So Jew though he was a Jew. Philo was far closer to mystery religion. He declared that the union of Adam and Eve was the place where initiation must begin, and that the knowledge must extend only to those who shared the initiation secrets. And most interesting of all, he allegorizes Adam as mind and Eve as sense perception. So the scenario is truly astonishing. Eve, he maintained, is represented as the one through whom animate beings receive life. As Philo goes on, it is apparent that there is no meaningful life without her. It is Eve who brings Adam what he lacks. This curious Alexandrian Jew explained that the mind personified as Adam was blind, not with an ordinary blindness, totally deprived of all ability to perceive any matter. All the sense organs. Adam, the mind, knew nothing of the outside world, for that by which they could be made known, perception did not exist. Without Eve, he could not have knowledge. All material objects were wrapped in darkness. He could not even walk erect without the staff of the sense organs with which to support his faltering steps. He was but half of a complete soul. Okay, y'all know this. Y'all know this is not the creation story of Genesis chapter 1, 2, or 3. Oh my gosh. this is why even going back into the Hebrew language, just looking at Hebrew word definitions is vital and very significant. Oh my goodness. You can spot all this false doctrine a mile away once you get that solid foundation in you. All right. Eve. I'm not going to read out the paragraph. Eve caused the mind to see clearly the nature of things. Now Adam could perceive the reality which before had been unknown to him. Before the advent of Eve, he had no way of gaining knowledge. This is Philo now. This is Philo allegorizing the story of Adam and Eve. You can see he had a lot of gnostic thought, right? So, like one who is dazzled by a brilliant burst of sunshine in the middle of the night, or is roused from a deep sleep, or like a blind man who suddenly recovers his sight, the spirit encountered all the entire assemblage of those things which comprise the creation. And these phrases are reminiscent of language and concepts used in mystery religion and Gnosticism, right? So during the mysteries of Demeter and Eleusis and of Isis at Corinth, there was said to be a brilliant light shining in the midst of the night. In Gnosticism, blindness and sleep were symbolic of ignorance, which could be dispelled by true knowledge, gnosis. So in line with such traditions, the allegorical Eve is represented by Philo both as a life giver and light bringer. This man. Here, Philo is clearly allegorizing his interpretation of Eve, even though at other points he condemns her for causing Adam's death. He himself complains of those who distort the Genesis traditions. Yet, if Philo can typify Eve as bringing light and understanding to Adam, how might the story be understood by his less orthodox contemporaries? If he can describe Eve, even symbolically, as the one in whom the animate gains its life, it is not surprising that others revised the story to make her the source of human existence. Philo utilizes the very theme which drew rebuttal by Paul, namely Eve as the one who brings knowledge and meaningful life to Adam. His very treatment of the story indicates that he has had some contact with a more Gnostic point of view. So he speaks, Paul speaks of certain Alexandrian Jews who allegorize the scriptures to the exclusion of their literal meaning. Right? Yet Philo himself was not beyond reproach. We have seen that by the early 1st century CE, his allegorization had changed Eve from temptress to illuminator of Adam. He considered Genesis chapter 2, verse 21 to be myth-like rather than literal. And even the serpent is allegorized as a beneficent means of uniting mind and sense perception in order to give true comprehension. Roger Pearson suggests that at times Philo directed his polemics specifically against Gnostic doctrine. It cannot be demonstrated with absolute certainty, that Philo's opponents were Gnostic, but it can be demonstrated that there existed heretical elements in Alexandrian Judaism, which were coterminous with the rise of Christianity. The Jewish communities of Alexandria and Ephesus maintained strong commercial and religious ties. Apollos, a learned Jew from Alexandria, was welcome to teach in the synagogue at Ephesus. Acts chapter 18, verses 24 to 26, you can see that. And others may have brought a less orthodox message. So, Alexandria. You know where that was, right? Alexandria in Egypt. You got Egypt, and then you have Alexander who conquered Egypt, and a lot of Egypt culture was carried over into the Greek, and the Greek picked up all this crazy stuff, and the Greeks started implementing these things in their culture. And then, since the Greeks got these things implemented in their culture, then Jews, Israelites, right? You hanging around these Greeks who were Hellenized now, because that's where Hellenism comes from, Greeks. You got all these Jews, Israelites, hanging around this mindset, hanging around this culture. What happens? You start taking on that culture as if it was yours. But the Father, Yahweh Elohim, said, do not assimilate into this culture when you go into these people's land. And this is also a symptom of captivity. We went into captivity. When we went into exile, you know, the Father said we would serve these other gods, wood and stone, these other people's deities. We were learning their culture when we were supposed to get them to learn our culture, which is the Torah, the law of Moses, right? Happy face emoji. All right. I loved reading this book. This book was off the chain. All right. Screen share. All right, so here we go with adaptations of the Eve story. What time is it? Okay, I gotta get to it. I only want to be on for like an hour and a half, but I think I got one more chapter to go after this. I'm stopping in what, 40 minutes. All right. Gnosticism appears to be the work of heterodox diaspora Jews. Let me say that again. Gnosticism appears to be the work of heterodox diaspora Jews. What did I just say? Jews that went into exile, right? So the transition did not take place all at once or all in the same place. For our information about the process, we are dependent upon the accounts of the church fathers, largely based upon religious conditions in Asia Minor. Right? All right, let's go down. Many different versions of the Adam and Eve story circulated in Jewish circles, and Josephus, from the 1st century AD or CE, knew of some of the less orthodox renderings. In Gnostic texts, we find that Cain is a hero instead of Abel, that Eve and the serpent are salvation figures, and that the God of the Old Testament is given extremely poor press. Wow. Indeed, one group taught that God was evil. It was necessary to oppose him at every point. Since he commanded, thou shalt not commit adultery, the adherents were encouraged to commit adultery whenever possible. That is off the chain, y'all. Gosh, wow. For us to conceive of an ethical system which is based upon a repudiation of the God of the Hebrew Bible. P. Van Byron declared Gnosticism is a religion of revolt. Yes, that's what it is. So already it has become apparent that this is a very deviant sort of religious belief, and that it is taking great liberties with the Genesis story. Celsus, who was a pagan, took the story of the serpent to be an old wives' tale and reported that Gnostics told Jewish stories of the Garden of Eden to old women. In point of fact, he said these tales were so preposterous that they were fit only for old women. Let me go here for a hot second. Let me read something here. Let's go into 1 Timothy chapter. Yeah. Okay. 1 Timothy chapter 4. Verse 1 Timothy chapter 4. Let me read from verse 1. 1 Timothy chapter 4, let me read from verse 1. It says, and I'm reading from the scriptures, ISR. I think this is 98. They have 98 and 2009 versions. All right, it says, 1 Timothy chapter 4, starting in verse 1, but I want to key in on a verse when I get there, I'll let you know. It says, but the Spirit distinctly says that in latter times some shall fall away from the belief, paying attention to misleading spirits and teachings of demons, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having been branded on their own conscience, forbidding to marry, saying to abstain from foods which Elohim created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth, because every creature of Elohim is good and none is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving. Not talking about being able to eat pork and shellfish now. You know, this is saying that whatever the Father created as food acceptable for us to eat, it's saying eat that in Thanksgiving. It's not saying you can go ahead and eat anything you want. Because if that's the case, anybody saying that, where do I see you roasting a dog at? Where do I see you roasting a cat? If you're going to eat some jellyfish, if you're going to eat some rhinoceros meat, you know what I mean? But let me continue. Because every creature of Elohim is good and none is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is set apart or holy by the word of Elohim and prayer. If you present these matters to the brothers, you shall be a good servant of Yeshua Messiah, being nourished in the words of belief and of the good teaching which you have followed closely. Verse 7. But refuse profane and old wives' fables, and exercise yourself rather to reverence. Reverence what? The true doctrine, which Paul is admonishing people at Ephesus to do. These old wives' tales. Old wives' tales. All right. Let's share the screen. Let's go back and let's continue. All right, so now we're looking at Haggadic, Mishnaic, and Septuagintal elements. Haggadah. Okay, nobody in the chat. All right. Haggadah. Gnostic writing reveals a usage of Haggadic traditions. The serpent, the tree, the creator. Haggadic are stories passed down from one generation to the next. Stories that were meaningful. But to tell your children about characters in the scriptures and things like that, or a way. What is it? Haggadah. or a way something is ordered. The way something is ordered, like a program. You know what I mean? Okay. All right. So Gnostic writings reveals the usage of Haggadic traditions, the serpent, the tree, the creator, God, some of which date back to the 1st century BCE. Albright wrote Gnosticism had already developed some of its most pronounced sects well before the fall of Jerusalem. That's CE 70 or AD 70. Okay. Berger, Pearson, and others have traced the development of Midrashic and Septuagintal material, especially the tradition of Sophia, into the lore focused upon the Midrash is from the Drash, or from the metaphorical or figurative. So it's actually Midrash is actually people sitting around doing a study, bringing out exegeting, bringing out what they've learned from the scripture. So a Midrash, you have people sitting down, talking, studying, and then there are recordings of those discussions on what the word of the Father was actually saying. Right? That's called your Midrashic studies. And the Septuagint is the Old Testament translated into the Greek language starting in about 300 BCE. All right. All right. Associations of Eve with Zoe, Sophia, and the tree may have arisen in the minds of those who could only catch snatches of the topics under discussion. Okay, so the Adam and Eve story, even in its canonical form, is one of the most eminently tellable stories. Right? As household storytellers, Gentile slaves in Jewish homes required to tell stories of biblical characters rather than those of classical mythology. It would be easy to pour the new wine of biblical figures into the old skins of a structure they already knew. So cultural exchange may have occurred far more readily in the women's quarters than elsewhere, and here young children of both sexes heard the tales which shaped their thought, of course, right? So certainly the mistreatment and abuse of Eve by the arrogant archons was a motif which they could well develop in accord with the pagan myths they already knew. You know, the Gentiles, they coming out of paganism a lot, right? Faces of Eve. The figure of Eve appears frequently in Gnostic writings. It is indeed a multiple image. There is both a heavenly and an earthly Eve. The figure, often moving interchangeably with that of Sophia, wisdom, or Zoe, life. The Hebrew word Eve literally means life, and in Genesis chapter 3, verse 20, she is called the mother of all living. And often Eve becomes synonymous with Zoe, you know, in Gnostic text life. And in the Septuagint version of Genesis chapter 3, verse 21, Adam names his wife not Eve, but Zoe. This is crazy. Woo! This translation of the Hebrew Bible was widely read in the New Testament world and often was quoted by the Apostle Paul. That is true. And using this Greek text, Philo wrote that Adam beheld the newly created Eve and gave the name of life, Zoe, to his own death. Let's look at this. Roots for the words life, serpent, instructor, and Eve lay close together and became a play on words in both Jewish and Gnostic tradition. That I definitely have heard of. In the book Guardian Angel by Skip Mullen, he looks at the Aramaic word for Eve and gives a possible definition for what Eve means in the Aramaic, and it definitely is a play on words. If y'all get a chance to check that out. All right, so the pun, the Haggadah in Genesis Rabbah chapter 20 verse 11 as a commentary on Genesis chapter 3 verse 20. His wife's name Hawa, she was given to him for an advisor or instructor, but she played the eavesdropper like the serpent. He showed her how many generations she had destroyed. Rabbi Acha's commentary took the form of an apostrophe to Eve. The serpent was thy serpent, and thou art Adam's serpent. Wow. So this was an era when similarity in the sounds of words was often supposed to demonstrate other sorts of affinities. As Berger Pearson noted, the teaching role of both the serpent and Eve is the subject of considerable speculation in Gnostic literature. Eve are still joined together as a being who is both male, a divine element, but lose it at their separation. Right? Let me read this. By the 1st century CE or 1st century AD, Eve had assumed a larger than life status and had assumed the ability to communicate mystic knowledge. This is crazy. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. I already know this because I've been going through this book. It just gets me every time I read it. All right, so as we have seen, the Septuagint version created the impression that Eve was to be identified with Dame Wisdom, Sophia. And accordingly, Eve sometimes appears in Gnostic literature as Zoe, sometimes as Sophia, sometimes as the epinoia or afterthought within Eve, and also as the female instructing principle. Declared because of this, she was named Zoe, or what is that? Life. That is the mother of the living through the forethought of the authentia, and through her they tasted the perfect knowledge. So it is the more confusing to discover that at some points there are two Eves, one earthly and one spiritual, and that sometimes they talk to each other. Oh my gosh, the heavenly Eve embodies a superior teaching principle and provides guidance for her earthly counterpart. This is why we got to go back into this original Hebrew words and definitions, man, because we got to make sure we're not teaching this Gnosticism out here. But in order to find out if you're not teaching something, you have to go back into the historical accounts and see what's going on, what kind of things were being spread, what kind of culture was around, what kind of people were around, what kind of things that these people believe in. All right. So in each of these Gnostic accounts about the Garden of Eden episode, for Eve to partake of the fruit always comes from a feminine cosmic source, from Zoe, from Eve Zoe, the instructress of life, from the spiritual woman who was the instructor, from the epinoia of light. And within the serpent, mother who is communicating, and the serpent is itself wisdom. in the next chapter, we shall examine more closely the identification of Eve with the mother goddesses. Yo, this sorry, Paul was dealing with a lot. And I'm glad the Father led me to do the research on this and led me to discover this book with this information in it, because when we don't know what Paul was dealing with, going Paul had to deal with doing away with false doctrine. Paul had to come in and deal with Roman law and people who were under Roman law, who were coming into the fold of the Most High Yahweh through his son Yeshua. You know what I mean? And then he had to deal with some of the Jews in Judaism at that time, teaching the oral Torah, teaching the oral law, the traditions of men. Paul had a lot to deal with. So Eve, you see these crazy Gnosticism stories of Eve. So this lets us know what 1 Timothy chapter 2 is really bringing out. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13 especially, this lets us know why this passage says, because Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman, having been deceived, fell into transgression. Stories of Eve getting revised to fit people's perceptions, to fit these Greek mythological things that they had going on, because the Greeks, you know, they are the perpetrators of Hellenism. That's what Hellenism is. And they retold these Eve stories, these Garden of Eden stories, to fit their little Hellenistic culture beliefs. We got to be careful out here, y'all. We got to be careful. Zoe. All right, here we go. Okay. Next chapter. Hopefully this is not too long, because I've got about 20 more minutes. let me share the screen. All right. So the great goddesses and Eve. Here we go. If you guys had some wow factor going on, yeah. Here we go. In order to understand how Eve could be viewed as a being powerful enough to bestow life on Adam, of the identification that ancient people made between Eve and pagan goddesses. The process had begun by the 2nd millennium BCE. A goddess bearing the heroinized form of the name Eve was worshipped widespread in the worshipped widely in the ancient Near East. And E.A. Spicer maintains that the original Semitic name for Eve was transposed into the Hurrian name rather than vice versa. I got to read a lot of this chapter here, but we almost done. Hebat or Hepat, right, because the B and the P are interchangeable, right? Hebat or Hepat was viewed as a mother goddess par excellence, and a Jebusite king of Jerusalem was named servant of Hepat in the El Amarna letters. That's from the 14th century BCE. El Amarna letters. I think y'all heard of those. If you haven't, go back and research those, right? She was not unknown in Babylonian myth. Didn't I say these Greeks and these Romans get a lot of stuff from Babylon and Persia? And where did the children of Israel and Judah get exiled to and be around? Babylonians and Persians. Born along by spreading Hurrian influence, Hebat invaded the Hittite pantheon as the supreme female deity. She made her triumphal entry into Asia Minor by 1250 BCE. Her cult appears to have been introduced by Queen Puduhepas, the Hurrian consort of King, herself a priestess of the goddess. So illustration 12. Look what's going on here in this little picture. So Queen Puduhepas offers a libation to Hebat. Right, the mother. Hebat is the mother, goddess, right? Mother goddess worship over in Asia Minor. So in a bas relief of the 13th century BCE at Yazilikaya, near Bogaskayu in modern Turkey, because modern Turkey is what? Asia Minor. Asia Minor, it also had the name before it of Anatolia. Anatolia, right? So we see Hebat as she leads a line of Mesopotamian and Hurrian goddesses to an encounter with Hittite gods. Next picture, I believe. Her name is inscribed in Luwian hieroglyphic. And she rides upon a panther to meet and wed Teshub, the Hittite storm god. Okay, I don't know where that, let me see, illustration 13. Maybe it's coming up. I don't know. I don't remember. Okay, so her bridegroom and his attendants stand upon the mountaintops, represented as men with pointed caps. Men with pointed caps? Men with pointed caps, y'all. Okay, I gotta stop. I gotta stop. I gotta stop. Let me just keep going. Because y'all know where I was about to get off into with that. All right. The bride wears a high crown similar to that worn by Cybele and Artemis of Ephesus, and a stiffly pleated skirt. Behind her follows the whole retinue of goddesses, as well as her son by Shetub, Saruma, and her daughter Alanzu. She is attended by Dakita, perhaps Semitic, the little one, a servant of Habat in the mythology. And then follow Hutena and Hutalora, birth goddesses, who were also the mythological creatresses of humanity. This is crazy. This is crazy. Because I got to read all of this. So under the impetus of Queen Putuhapas, her enthusiastic devotee, the new deity soon assimilated with the sun goddess, Shun, goddess of Arena, the major goddess in the Hittite pantheon. So the Hittites, I think they were originally coming from the Asia Minor area, right? Habat is also identified in the ancient text as Queen of Heaven. Oh, making the cakes for the Queen of Heaven. I'll go Google that in, because that's what the Father says some of the Israelites were indulged in, making cakes for the Queen of Heaven. Over here, indulging in this pagan culture stuff. This is why the Father said, be careful. When you go over to these lands, be careful not to assimilate off up into their culture. Let me continue. Despite her majestic power, Habat is also frail enough to encounter mishaps. One myth reveals that the powerful goddess can be dispossessed from her temple, be wronged by a Diorite man, agonize over the fate of her consort, and suffer a near-death experience. Furthermore, she is in danger of being consigned to the toil of grinding corn. Here and elsewhere, her association with the Babylonian Ishtar is explicit. Babylonian Ishtar, right? I talked about that earlier today, how the female goddesses were pretty much the same character, the same woman, but depending on which land or country or which culture you were in, the name was different, but the characteristics of this woman was the same. Watch this. So this is illustration 13 here. So these are the men in the pointed caps. Oh my gosh. This is the men with the pointed caps. And these are these servants of this mother goddess woman. Depiction of Habat from a shrine of Yazilikaya. Let me continue. So the image, statue of Cybele, Museum of Anatolian Civilization, Ankara. I don't think they have that image here because it says image not included because of rights restrictions. Yeah, I got this book, PDF from a PDF off of off of Scribd app. The Scribd app, SCRIBD. And sometimes when books are digitized, they have the right to go ahead and show illustrations. Sometimes they do not have the right. But yeah, pointed caps. Yeah, hey, sis, there's a beginning to where all this crazy stuff we see come from. And this is why it's so very vital to do our historical research, do our due diligence to go back into Asia Minor, modern day Turkey, and see what went on, because this is where Paul went. Up here, They were coming out of paganism, and they were coming into the fold of Yahweh Elohim and his commandments through his son Yeshua's shed blood. And you know, he had to rid the Gentiles of a lot of things, man. He had a lot to deal with. But pointed caps, I ain't even finna bring up what I'm finna bring up about the pointed caps. But let me continue. Woo-wee! How much time I got? Okay. Here we go. The myths of Habbat were preserved largely in Hittite rituals used by feminine adherents known as wise women or old women. The names of 32 such women still remain, as well as many of the actual rites over which they presided. Many of the rituals are specifically said to have women as their authors. All right. The name of Habbat appears in Hittite and Hurrian texts until new language groups invaded Asia Minor, and Habbat became conflated with the Phrygian Sybil. All right. All right. So her development as a Phrygian goddess is harder to chart, as no Phrygian text has yet been discovered, and Phrygian inscriptions are largely undecipherable. All right, so we're going to talk about Sybil for a minute. Sybil, the mother goddess whose cult dominated Asia Minor, was also linked with Eve. Pay attention to this, y'all. Pay attention. The iconography, iconography demonstrates that Sybil was worshipped at Katal Hayuk as early as 5500 BCE. And then it says, see illustration 15 for that. Let's see if it comes up, right? For thousands of years, she maintained her identity as mother of gods and men. Many centuries later, those who still celebrated her rites bestowed on Eve the attribution which the older goddess had borne for so long, mother of all that live, universal in nature, of gods and angels, immortals and mortals, irrational of rational beings. Okay, so Sybil's cult became widespread not only in Asia Minor but also throughout the Greek and Roman world. The legend of her origins and of her tragic love for Attis is told in many forms. All right. Amid the varying details, the myths speak of her human birth, her father when he discovered her pregnancy, her devotion to Attis, betrayal of that love, and her grief over his death. The stories ascribe to her aspects both of human suffering and of divine omnipotence. Wow. So they don't show the pictures here, as they can't show them. The multiplicity of Sybil legends indicates that women had been at their task as storytellers. The stories bear two images of Sybil as at once human and a goddess who was both terrifying and beneficent, a characteristic which is clearly developed in the mythology of Eve. And ultimately, however, the dichotomy between the powerful Gnostic Eve as revealer and the sorrowful, very human Jewish heroine was stretched too far, and she split into a heavenly Eve. And the opposing characteristics in Sybil's nature and myth were comprehended in a yearly cycle of rituals expressing her sorrow and mourning, followed by ecstasy and wild celebration, the hilaria. This alternation of mood, necessitating in the worshippers enormous changes in response, may well have been one of the strengths of the cult. Here we go. Identification with Isis. Hey, yo, this blew my mind, blew my mind. All right. Egypt. Eve was identified with Isis, an ancient goddess who was rejuvenated in the Hellenistic period. Because let me continue. I ain't even gonna go there. Her cult was popular all over the Mediterranean world, including Ephesus, as we have seen. association with serpents was strong, as the vision of a devotee shows. This is the vision of the devotee. It says this: an intricately designed crown encircled her high forehead with many sorts of flowers. At the center of it, over her face, shone a flat disc like a mirror, or rather the white light of the moon. On the right and left were bound spirals of upraised vipers. On the right and left were bound spirals of upraised vipers. From her left hand hung a golden cup, from whose handle, at a conspicuous point, there arose on ASP, raising its head high, its throat puffed twice. Excuse me, its throat puffed wide. I don't know if you guys got a visual of anything when I was just reading that, but okay, vipers, snakes, vipers and snakes, serpents. They have a, you know, we're going to talk about that later. I think you guys are getting a visual. Medusa ring a bell? They start associating Eve and with these women. These women were depicted with snakes and stuff. Okay, let me continue. At the behest of Ptolemy I, Isis was given a Hellenized interpretation by Timothy, a priest at Eleusis. So this is a different Timothy, okay? Thereafter, Isis developed a persona not unlike the Eleusinian Demeter, the Earth Mother, who was raped by Zeus and bore a daughter who was subsequently stolen away by Hades, god of the underworld. The sorrowing mother searched in grief until the girl was returned. Demeter's rites, like those of Isis, promised a blessed hereafter to those who were initiated. As faithful wife, Isis sought throughout the world for the remains of her slain husband. Does this ring a bell? You guys hearing this? Isis sought throughout the world for her remains of her slain husband. Ultimately, she rose to the status of savior and sovereign of the universe and promised to her devotees knowledge, gnosis, of the one who is the first, a comprehension of true reality. Isis. You guys go back and do some research. This all has to do with, you know, Christmas, I'll say. It has to do with Christmas. And why there are trees brought into people's homes. It goes back to those green trees that the Father told us to knock down. Them asherim, or them groves. Them poles, P-O-L-E-S, them poles. Okay, let me continue, because if I don't, stop right here. Okay, all right. I got a couple minutes. Okay, astounding claims were made on behalf of Isis. These claims were embedded in so-called what is that? Eritologies, in which Isis proclaimed her own virtues. Frequently, the eritologies are couched in the I am, ego eimi form that readers of the Bible will recognize as a formula employed repeatedly in the Gospel of John. So it lists the following virtues found in Asia Minor, and I'm not going to read those. But if Isis controlled the dog star, Eve was identified with Cassiopeia, one of the brightest constellations in the heavens. As the mother of all, Isis is clearly conflated with Eve. This may have been especially true of an identification with Isis Thermutis, who was worshipped in serpent form. Look at that. This is Thermutis over here in illustration 16. Serpent. The story, the Garden of Eve and Adam, Garden of Adam and Eve and all these other women out here having to do with snakes. Gosh, Lee. This may have been especially true of an identification with Isis Thermutis, who was worshipped in serpent form. Talking about Eve and the serpent brought enlightenment to the world. Get out of here. Her images sometimes showed her even as a serpent nursing her young son. She was not unobserved in the ancient world. Rabbi Judah particularly forbade the manufacture of idols in the form of Isis nursing her infant, because a woman giving suck alludes to Eve, who suckled the whole world. Of course, get rid of it. I understand. Ordinarily, a prohibition implies that someone is actually engaged in such a practice. You think? Of course. You say it's forbidden because somebody doing it. The incorporation of the characteristics, and in some places almost verbatim, of the Egyptian goddess into Gnostic Eve texts has been well noted. Rose Foreman Arthur wrote, the assimilation of Isis material within an account of Eve is a remarkable instance of the interweaving of Egyptian and Jewish material. In Gnostic sources also sometimes takes the ego eimi, I am. Right? So let me read this. Frequently, however, the ego eimi is posed in a baffling list of paradoxes. Check this out. It says, for I am the one who is the first and the last. I am the one who is the honored one and the despised. I am the one who is the harlot and the holy one. I am the one who is the wife and the virgin. I am the one who is mother of my father and the sister, and he is the one to whom I gave birth. This is why some people have a hard time believing in the supernatural birth of Yeshua from Miriam, because they can't distinguish what's a false doctrine out there versus what is truth. But me, I want to do the work, and I did the work. I'm able to ask the Father for his Holy Spirit to lead me and guide me into all truth and give me discernment. Right? So this quite clearly follows the formula of the Isis eritologies, a fact which is less surprising when we remember the importance of female deities in the ancient world. Perfect mind, the heavenly Eve, declares, from the power was I sent forth, and to those who think upon me have I come, and I was found in those who seek after me. Behold me, you who think about me, and you hearers listen to me, you who await me, receive me to yourselves. That is from these freaking Gnostic texts, of course. Right? From these Gnostic texts, for many are the delightful forms that exist in manifold sins and incontinencies, right? And passions and pleasures, which last for the night. People grasp, become sober, and flee up to their resting place, and they will find me in that place, and they shall live, and they will not return to death, i.e., not reincarnate in a prison-like body. You hear these Gnosticism texts? This is some crazy stuff. All right, so here Eve is portrayed as a savior sent into the world to free souls who have been entrapped in a body. That's Gnosticism, y'all. To quote Bentley Layton, she descends from another realm of power and rest. She suffers, recalls the soul to soberness and her proper home, and reascends, showing the way for those who will be saved. Layton continues his commentary on this text. He says this: the savior of mankind. Wow. She saves by preaching, demanding reorientation of mind and heart. She invites comparison with the authority of Isis and its Dame Wisdom. She is an element within those to whom she is sent. The instrument of broadcasting and the instrument of reception are one and the same. She and they are in the same paradoxical situation. so that self-knowledge and knowledge of the Savior may at least partly be the same. Finally, she and the saved have the same home. Oh my goodness. Let me continue because I'm done. So it was that the figure of Eve developed from that of deceived sinner to that of a powerful spiritual being in need of salvation. Her human frailty was replaced by the might of a goddess. The numerous variants of the story now projected the spiritual potency of Eve and had reshaped themselves into dangerous, yes, and destructive doctrines, which the writer of the pastorals repudiated. Let me say that again. The numerous variants of the story now projected the spiritual potency of Eve and had reshaped themselves into dangerous and destructive doctrines, which the writer of the Pauline letters repudiated. Who's the writer of the Pauline letters? Paul, the majority of the time, but there's other writers of the Pauline letters. That information comes later. I think I've already talked about that. If I haven't, I'll bring it up later. But Paul was repudiating these freaking gnostic stories. Repudiating them. So, of course, women cannot teach false doctrine. Of course, men can't teach false doctrine either. The Father wants us to be in line with his Torah. The Father wants us to be in line with the right Hebraic rendering of Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3. Paul was battling Gnosticism. And you could tell why he was battling Gnosticism. This stuff was spreading like California wildfire. It's dangerous and it's destructive. And it's spreading fast. And a lot of people out here are teaching that doctrine. Don't even know it. A lot of people out here telling women they can't teach because they don't understand that Paul was saying that they can't teach false doctrine. It didn't say that women can't teach. Everything has to go line up with the Torah. The law of Moshe, the law of Moses. Everything has to line up with Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And the prophets. If no one can find in the Torah of Yahweh or the law of Moshe, if no one can find in there a prohibition for women to teach, please stop. If no one can find a prohibition in the prophets, stop, please. Please go back and verify, validate everything I bring out, everything I say. If you need some more information, holla at me. My information is in the description box. This is not about women overpowering men. This is not about men overpowering women. It's about getting the proper context of the word. Out here abusing one another, mistreating one another, arguing and debating one another. So we won't be out here teaching false doctrine. So we won't be out here oppressing people. So we won't be out here blaming people for what they don't have no blame for. This is about love, compassion, grace, mercy, and patience. I love y'all. I love the Father. That's what I'm doing this for. I want to say shalom, shalom. Thank you all who joined in today. And for those who watch later, I hope this is edifying for you. Until next time, I say to you, shalom.